In other words, these studies that were behind this thing that many parents in the UK read and get worried by and get fearful about was based on something that had not one mention of social networking, even though that was in the title of the paper. It was all about older people who are the lowest users of social networking, and the only paper that was mentioned, that actually mentioned the internet, had reversed findings in it. What's going on here? This is not science. This is somebody who's publishing books and wants to sell them.
The Royal Society of Biologists had a whole team of biologists looking very specifically at what you're saying. Interestingly, you're not a scientist, A, and Ben Goldacre is a journalist. They didn't agree with the two of you and looked very deeply into what I published and dismissed your concerns and sided with mine. And the paper I just gave you on social networking at Stanford in 2009 is far more modern, which is why I didn't include that 2001 paper.
Okay,
you know that.
Let's turn to some modern papers then. There are three up here, which you choose to ignore. Again, this is Ben. It takes about 3 minutes to find these on the internet, and it's one of hundreds. If you look at Ben's blog, you'll find all of those. Actually, what the papers tend to suggest, if you look across the broad scope and you don't cherry pick, just as we've seen here in that short speech, you find that the results support the hypothesis that the relationship between loneliness and the preference for online social interaction is spurious. The second one, it's associated with a lower level of social loneliness. In other words, the use of social networking on the whole is not, loneliness has nothing to do with the total time spent online or the total time spent on email. By and large, the literature points to social networking being a useful thing. Going back to those original papers, those women who had ovarian cancer, don't you think that social networking might be of use to people with chronic diseases? My sister has a chronic disease, she's in a wheelchair. The internet is her life, it supports her. It's a positive, not a negative thing. This is why this debate's important, and not to frighten people into avoiding the use of technology when it's of so much use to us as a society. And what we really should be looking for is some objective evidence here. Okay, we can back and forward here. I could cherry pick, Aric could cherry pick, but let's look at some of the wider reports here. And in the UK, the government rightly published and commissioned a report that was supposed to give us some objectivity on the use of computers amongst young children. And they did look at children's brain development, child development research, effects of media and literature, and so on. And you can look at this on the internet if you want. And what did they find? There is no clear evidence of desensitization in children. And the cherry picking of the games example, when you had reduced blood flow in the brain in playing games, ask this guy down here who spent his life in neuroscience looking at the effect of games in the brain to see how ludicrous that piece of cherry picking was. Children actively involved in sport play on consoles for the same amount of time than those who are not. A very interesting finding. It's one of the big myths that children don't play any sport because they're online all the time. And technology is specifically useful for those with learning difficulties and disabilities. Now, let me turn to the learning proposition in education for a moment. Because the US Department of Education, huge study looking at data from 96 to 98, looking for rigorous effects, controls, random assignment, good science. What did they find? That the meta-analysis found that on average, students were performing better when they're using e-learning. And the bottom point was that e-learning, when used properly in this blended learning proposition, which many of you know about, is actually additive. It helps, it improves. It doesn't undermine education, it helps and improves the process. And then let's look at something that happened in 2009. Have a look at some of the lectures on YouTube EDU, Professor Letwin, who's had 500,000 people look and download his physics lectures. Are you telling me that this type of technology is undermining higher education? And who do you think those 500,000 people are? They're students in China and in the developing world who don't have access to high-end university education. Interestingly, there are lots of students in universities with crap physics lecturers who are also using this stuff as well. This is additive. It's improving the educational system, not taking us away from it, as is iTunes U. Most of the major universities, 350 worldwide, have started to put their content online because they know it helps. MIT OpenCourseWare, OpenLearn.OU, Project Gutenberg, the entire canon of Western literature online, that's a bad thing? We're undermining traditional education? I think not. And then if you were here a couple of years ago and saw the wonderful work being done in India with kids who have no schools, who don't have enough to eat, who still find the technology entrancing, illuminating, and educational. And what a wonderful thing that is if we can get that right, because it's not just about the posh kids in Western democracies, it's about the developing world. That's why this is an important debate. And if this is the proposition, this is Dewey who said this some time ago, if we teach today, as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. That is a fact. In any case, the genie's out the bottle, we're going to deal with it, but believe me, it's additive. It's wonderful, and if you, like me, have traveled to the third world and into the Middle East and Africa and seen the one laptop per child projects, you'll gasp with amazement at the potential of this stuff, and you won't be too worried about whether Facebook causes cancer. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Donald. Our next speaker is Bruce Anderson, who is well known in the United Kingdom. He's a political columnist for the Independent newspaper. He is the biographer of the former Prime Minister John Major, and he's currently writing one about the Conservative leader David Cameron. He's known for his forthright and outspoken views, and is nicknamed by the satirical magazine Private Eye the Brute. Bruce.
A few years ago, ladies and gentlemen, a Lincolnshire farmer died and went to heaven. And on his first evening, St. Peter said, of course, it's the custom here that on your first night, you give a lecture to the heavenly host after dinner on a great world event of your lifetime. So he said, yeah, I'll do that. The Boston floods of 1952. And St. Peter said, the Boston floods of 1952, an important world event. Oh, yeah. So this farmer, I lost 6 sheep. And Jan Stewart next to me, he lost 12 sheep. And further down the river nearer the coast, someone was drowned. Oh, yeah, that was an important event. And St. Peter said, all right, the Boston floods of 1952. But just remember one thing, Noah will be in the audience. Now, I don't know why I'm here, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree by the time I've finished. I think my old friend Harold believes that I'm the sort of chap who could start a controversy if I was alone in a locked room. But I will not claim to arbitrate. I will not try to arbitrate between these two learned gentlemen. I will not try to provide a one-man peer review. About 25 years ago, I went to see a chap called David Young, who was later on Lord Young and a Tory cabinet minister. He was then in charge of vocational education, very exciting. And he was talking away about the keyboard. After a bit, I said, David, why is music so important in this vocational education project of yours? And then he explained about the keyboard. And I think I concluded, he said, do you think this is being Philistine? And I said, no. If you were taking children away forcibly from Bach and Shakespeare and putting them to the keyboard, well, that would be a bad thing. If you're taking them away from truancy and smoking cigarettes behind the bike shed and not paying attention in boring classes, and you can stimulate them, that's a good thing. And surely that is still the answer, that the technology is a wonderful servant and a bad master. Now, these arguments that we've heard about the time children spend on technology and screens, I think may miss out one factor, and that is that even before the screen was widely available, a lot of children, I'm afraid, were spending far too much time watching cretinizing television, having their brains dumbed by the trash on the idiot box. And what I suspect has happened has been a move from the idiot box to, in many cases, the idiot screen, which is no gain.
Bruce, were you a television producer as part of your career?